fathers saw themselves as civil people. George Washington wrote his 110 rules, and that can be, civility can be a tool, right? A weapon to sort of say, these people with their new idea, their new way of talking is out of bounds. I mean, I remember, from my youth, you had rappers talking about inner city problems, police violence, before the rest of the world did. The response was not to respond to the problem of police violence. The response was to try to put, Tipper Gore putting ratings on rappers. I mean, how do you negotiate a civility that, sort of leaves room for the person who doesn't have the sort of the elite vision of civility to contribute into the conversation?
I think that's a huge question. I think it's a huge question. It's one that we face when we use dialogue, and there are critiques of dialogue as a process that pacifies, so to speak. And similarly, the idea of civility can be one that silences, particularly if you understand civility in a particular cultural format. So if civility means speaking as we do right now, in moderated voices, in full sentences, waiting till the other person finishes, not interrupting, we're going to silence a lot of people. So I think if we don't want to have that silencing, the understanding of what civility is needs to expand and needs to be looked at more closely in cultural formats and cross-cultural formats. And what does civility mean across those? And not simply cross-cultural where it's, say, a European American and a tribal community sitting together. But also cultural formats where very often what we think of as homogenous, say, middle-class, educated American, Republican and Democrat, there's a lot of cultural difference there and a lot of language difference there. But because on the surface they look so similar, there are a lot of false friends, so to speak, when you get together. And there again, a call for simply civility is tricky and risks avoidance, risks silencing. So I think it's a very, very important question.
So what's the answer? Should the rule of thumb be that if you're going to be uncivil, you better have a really big and important point to make?
If you're going to be uncivil, no, because then you're still calling that person uncivil. I think
which can be sort of an insult, right? I mean,
so let's not call people who are protesters, for example, uncivil necessarily.
Exactly.
Protesting can be a very civil procedure.
Exactly.
Sure, it can be. Yeah.
You assemble, you have signs, you complain, you maybe make noise, but that's not necessarily incivility at all. That's the right to assemble. That's in our Constitution.
Right. Right,
but argument is not incivility.
Right.
I mean, I grew up in a country where we argue a lot. And for many Americans have tended, I didn't grow up, I'm now American, but people who've grown up here have often said, Americans are the most argumentative. Well, you haven't seen South Asians argue then. South Asians argue. But many of those arguments are not well, they even may sound uncivil. Some of it, there are ad hominem attacks, and yet there's a real engagement. And I think part of what, you use the word sort, you use it with reference to the political parties, but I think there's also been a cultural sorting that's followed a political sorting. People aren't used to talking across differences. I think you referred to that, Henry. Yeah. And so argument doesn't necessarily have to become uncivil with a capital U and a capital C or something like that. But so the rule of thumb is that you look at whether that conversation is working for the purposes of that conversation.